What's up, legends, and welcome back to my Unmatched Strategy Guide series. Today, as you could probably tell from the thumbnail you clicked on, we are going to be talking about mulligans. Now, before you say, baked goods, you soggy old cow, mulligans aren't even in this game, let me counter with a nice meme to soothe your troubled mind. But yes, hypothetical viewer, you are 100% correct. Nowhere in the rulebook does it mention anything about any sort of mulligan. And this was actually an intentional design choice. Unmatched restorer and Florida man Justin D. Jacobson said that mulligan rules weren't included because it made the game seem more competitive than it actually was, and they didn't want to scare anyone away with overly complicated rules. Also, rip Arthur buff. This game obviously works without any sort of mulligan rules, and I'm assuming a large majority of Unmatched players / my viewers don't play with them, which may lead you to wonder why I'm making a video about it. Great question. I'm so glad you asked. But before we get into the bulk of this video, I'd like to point out that I will be explaining what mulligans are and why we use them in competitive formats. And then in the second half of the video, I will go into some of the strategy of mulliganing, as well as some examples. So feel free to skip ahead if you already feel knowledgeable about this topic. And with that, let's go. So just in case you didn't know, mulligans are a process of adjusting which cards are in a player's opening hand. This process exists in a lot of other card games like Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone, and we'll talk about the different forms of mulliganing a little bit later. The key purpose of mulligans is to give players a way to mitigate opening hand randomness, or RNG. Let's take a look at an example.
Discard Fortune and Fate to boost. Okay.
He might be thinking about just taking the attack because he may think it's a voyage, and that's only 2 damage, and that,
Could
that
be a
defense.
You're gonna take it? Yeah. Momentous shift.
Oh my gosh, it was.
I said it.
You called it, Joshua.
He played great.
I think if not for that shift, he would be winning.
It was scheme. I was like, okay, scheme. You gotta be kidding me. Scheme. I was like, you have to be joking. And then it was a full attack card. I was like, well, at least I'm 4 spaces away. And then you boosted. I was like, well, I'm gonna pretend that I'm thinking about it, like you're bluffing, so you don't know that I have junk in my hand.
In case you missed what happened there, on turn 1 of this game, which was in the grand finals of the first ever tournament, BugHunter's Invisible Man was forced to take an undefended attack from Prospero's Sinbad because Bug didn't draw any block cards in his opening hand. The attack happened to be a 5-value momentous shift, and losing a third of his health that early basically cost Bug the game. After that first tourney, the tournament organizers added mulligan rules to all future tourneys to prevent, or at least lessen, the chance that any extreme events happen again. It really sucks to lose because of something completely out of your control, especially in the finals of a tournament you probably worked very hard to reach. As per the standard Unmatched rules, at the start of the game, you just draw 5 cards and jump right in. And as we've seen, this can be potentially problematic if your hand is doo-doo because sometimes you just don't draw any blocks and then you're screwed. Fun fact, the chances of the Invisible Man not drawing anything to block with in his opening hand is 2.1%. Technically 2.1073, but still, that's a ridiculously unlikely event, and unfortunately, it's just another example of how mathematics will always get the best of musical insects. So the specific mulligan rules installed into the Unmatched tournament process are as follows. After each player draws their starting hand, there is an optional full mulligan in which the player may shuffle their entire hand back into their deck and draw back the same number of cards, 5. And it's recommended that each player will do this at the same time, much like the blind picks for game 1 of a typical best of 3 conquest. This essentially gives you 2 chances at an opening hand. If you don't like your initial 5 cards, you can return them to your deck, shuffle, and draw 5 new cards, which you then have to keep. It isn't guaranteed that doing so will improve your hand necessarily, but having a backup option in case you get screwed on the first try, essentially like a redo, is nice. And for reference, the chances of the Invisible Man drawing an opening hand of no blocks, mulliganing, and drawing a second hand of no blocks is 0.044%, about 50 times less than just drawing 5 cards once. I would like to point out the specific mulligan type that we use and the distinction between a potential alternative. As I mentioned, tournaments use a full mulligan, like in Magic the Gathering, where you put your entire hand back into your deck, as opposed to just a partial mulligan, like in Hearthstone, where you can keep certain cards from your initial hand and only put back some, drawing replacements for what you put back. I think the full mull option was chosen because it's simpler and really doesn't add much time onto the match length, which can already be quite a while for some people, myself included. One interesting thing to note is that in games with full mulligans, like Magic or even Keyforge, is that there's a penalty, if you will, to mulliganing, as you get one fewer card in your second hand. Although in Magic you can mulligan multiple times and you just keep losing cards each time you mulligan. This penalty doesn't exist in Unmatched because, at least in tournament play, deck exhaustion is a viable endgame win condition for some heroes, and if your opponent's deck runs out, obviously they start taking fatigue damage, so trying to avoid drawing cards during the game is a potential tactic, and only drawing 4 cards at the start of the game would put you half a turn behind your opponent in deck count, which would be really good if that's the type of endgame you are going for. It's also potentially problematic because characters like Bloody Mary and Redacted Marvel character really like playing at a low hand size, and starting off at 4 cards is actually a tremendous head start for them. So basically what I'm saying is there shouldn't be a penalty for mulliganing based on the way that this game works. A free, essentially, full mull, I think is fine. So to summarize this expository section, mulligans were not included in the official game rules because they were seen as a barrier to entry for more casual players, but were added into competitive formats by players, basically, to help with opening hand randomness that shouldn't completely screw people over at the highest level of this game. So now that we are all on the same page in terms of what a mulligan is, how it works, and why competitive Unmatched has it, let's talk strategy. The question of should I mulligan is a difficult one to answer because it depends on a lot of factors, but mostly on the particular heroes being played during the game in question. Since the heroes will be different for nearly every game, that line of thinking is useless, so I will go through a general checklist of things to think about instead, which can be applied to roughly every hero, and then actually run through some examples given to me by my viewers. Before we get started on the general checklist, I want you to remember that a lot of these factors are, again, connected. Almost nothing I talk about should be looked at independently. The most common denominator for these questions, if you will, is map and starting position, because those two factors can dictate a lot of what will or can happen during the game. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. The first question is, does my deck have any uber super duper important cards, and did I draw any? This doesn't apply to every deck, but some decks have just one card, or in the unfortunate case of British royalty, multiple one-copy cards that can make a large impact on a game if utilized at the proper time. And most of these cards are really good to have at the start of the game. Cards like Phoenix Form and Excalibur are the primary examples here, but you could even include the Sight, Prophecy, maybe even Snicker Snack and Restless Spirits. These cards, save for the Sight, are all one copy, so having it in your opening hand is insurance that you'll actually have the chance to play it that game. The probability of having one individual card in your opening hand is about 16.5%, and with 2 chances to draw those 5 cards, mulliganing for one specific card in your deck will pay off maybe a third of the time, but that's show business, baby. Sometimes you gotta risk it for the biscuit, or in this case, remix for that Phoenix. On the flip side, there are some one-copy cards that you actually want to mulligan away. Sometimes you don't want to see a card right away because it's better to use later in the game, and keeping it in your opening hand essentially clogs up your hand since that currently useless card is taking up a slot of your limited hand size. This gives you less options for the current turn, although your opponent doesn't necessarily know that. So a few potent mind games can still work despite you being at a little bit of a disadvantage there. Some examples of late/later game cards are Lady of the Lake, Holy Grail, Voyage Home, and Taste of Blood. These cards either have an effect that triggers at a low health threshold or rely on you having already played certain cards, both of which are extremely unlikely, if not impossible, scenarios to be in on your first or second turn. I will acknowledge that sometimes it's worth holding on to a late game 1-copy card because it might be too risky to shuffle back into your deck and risk not seeing it at all. There is, of course, only 1 copy of it. Dumpster Diving Deadpool is actually a great example of this because often Deadpool needs to play that card in order to have a chance of victory, and it might be worth it to hold on to that as a dead card in your hand for a few turns in order to actually guarantee that you will be able to use it that game. The next question is, do you have a sidekick? Sidekicks are such a funny idea. They usually play an important part of a hero's game plan, and some are absolutely integral to their hero's success. Let's generalize and say that most sidekicks have impactful cards, and obviously you can't play their cards if the sidekick is dead. Therefore, sidekick cards are great to have in hand early so that you actually get a chance to play them. Cards like Highway Robbery, Jackalope Horns, any pat-killing cards, either Jabberwock card, Grimtail, Ravening Seduction, any Merlin card, and Clutching Claws are probably all cards you would like to see in your opening hand. Just like healing, getting use out of your sidekick is usually better than not getting any use out of them at all. The next few questions have to do with the 2 big ones I mentioned earlier. What map am I playing on, and am I going first or second? Like I said, all of these factors are connected, but especially these. Unless you are the Raptors, starting position doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's tied to the map being used, and there are certain maps that lead to certain opening tactics. Let's explore, starting with the ever-present question, am I going first? Some fighters, typically the aggressive ones like Bloody Mary and the Raptors, really benefit from going first and can therefore mulligan for their best offensive options to try and get the jump on their opponent from the get-go. However, in competitive play, you must look for every advantage you can get, which for some heroes might require asking yourself, is there any cheese tactic I can employ with a specific card? Some characters can do some incredibly degenerate things with specific cards on certain maps, and exploits like these usually only work if you're going first, so that your opponent can't act before you do. The 2 I am especially familiar with are Dracula's Ravening Seduction on Raptor Paddock and The Thing, aka Little Red's Never Leave the Path on Sarpedon. I'm certain there's a few more, maybe even some people haven't discovered yet. The point here being that it might just be worth it to ditch a decent looking starting hand if you didn't draw your specific cheese card. But that requires a specific hero on a specific map, going first, sometimes even a specific opponent. So the planets got to be aligned before you free the Titans, if you get what I mean. However, most heroes can still make a big play turn 1 without taking advantage of a cheese tactic. So ask yourself next, how far apart are the starting spaces? This is important to think about when going first because depending on the distance between you and your opponent, you can zoom in and get an attack off before your opponent has a chance to maneuver or otherwise draw any cards. This, of course, puts them at the liberty of randomness, just as we saw in the clip from earlier. If you are potentially able to attack turn 1, it might be worth it to mulligan for aggressive cards like Ambush, Momentous Shift, or basically anything with a printed value of 5 or higher. I just wrote a whole analysis on the different boards and space counts to put into this video before realizing that that should actually go into my map analysis video. So we'll be returning to this particular topic in about a month or 2. Or 5. Let's go full circle and say you're starting second. I think going first is generally better, but some characters like playing defensively, and going second is perfect for that because your opponent will be forced to make the first move, usually. So when going second, what are some things to look for when deciding whether to mulligan or not? Well, the first question is, can my opponent attack me on their first turn? Spoiler alert, yeah, they can. The average distance between starting spaces on the maps in the game right now is about 4 spaces. Some are a little higher than that, and some are 3. But if you're a ranged character, or your opponent is a ranged character, it's usually even less than that since they just have to move into your zone, often only 2 or 3 spaces at most. So when looking at your hand, you should ask yourself, do I have any block cards in my hand? And what will I block with if I get attacked right away? You don't have to be a super talented musician to see that no blocks equals big trouble. Mulliganing is probably a good idea if you have minimal defensive options, especially if you think your opponent will attack you on their first turn. If you have a 1 health sidekick like a worker or an otherwise useless meat shield like Youself in the way, you might not block anyways, so it might not even matter, but generally I'd say you probably want to block. One other thing to think about is the quality of your blocks. Let's say you have a feint and a skirmish in hand. Those are 2 very decent block cards, but if those are your only options, you'll be forced to play one, usually because blocking is generally a good idea. Whereas you might want to play a more mediocre block instead and save your premium blocks for specific points later in the game. So just besides your ability to block, think about what you'd actually be blocking with and if you would prefer a second chance at mulliganing for more diverse options. And of course, I don't even know if this is helpful advice because it's generally a good idea for your opponent, if they're attacking you on their first turn, to be really aggressive and throw out their best attack, but they could also just throw out a regroup. So the quality of blocks that you have available, it's all part of the mind games that make this game great. And figuring out what to block with when is just something that takes a lot of practice. The next question is, what does my deck want to do? Do my current cards help me progress towards that goal in any way? This question is very straightforward for some heroes and a little bit more abstract for others. Sinbad and Bruce Lee are pretty obvious. They want to play Voyages and Jeets, respectively, and preferably sooner rather than later to activate ability movement increases or be like Waters, respectively. Both of them have great manners, so they always fight respectfully. Achilles usually wants to kill off Pat ASAP as possible, so having Battle Frenzy, Day of Your Doom, or Helm in your opening hand can help speed that process up. Little Red usually wants a variety of symbols available in her hand so that she can line up multiple cards in a row and trigger their effects, but a basket helps as well. There are some decks that thrive on late game value plays and often just need to survive early enemy aggression long enough to draw their combo pieces to win. Some decks just have a bunch of decent cards that will overwhelm the opponent in the long game. Getting out of the early game for heroes like Sherlock, Muldoon, and Yanenga is crucial, and having blocks available early game can help them win in the long term. Figure out what your deck wants to do, especially at the start of the game, and ditch a hand that doesn't help you do that. The next question is kind of a mirror image of the last one, but what does my opponent's deck want to do? Do I have any ways of slowing them down? A lot of times this will boil down to if you have a feint in your first 5 cards. Feint is one of the most powerful cards in the game, and having a cancel in hand right off the bat can give you a big advantage early. But like I mentioned in the block section, sometimes you want to save your feints later in the game, but usually throwing one out on defense in the first couple turns is fine, especially against effects-based enemies. This isn't always the case though. Sometimes you want a big value block if you're going against someone like Bigfoot that might log you turn 1 for a lot of damage. Some decks rely on their sidekick early, and if left alive, they might get a lot of value out of them late in the game. Do you have any ways of quickly dealing with that sidekick? Maybe Stallion Charge or some sort of AoE damage like Never Leave the Path to deal with multiple sidekicks, or maybe just a big attack or no contest expecteth to deal with a single sidekick. Do you have any discard effects to punish early aggression and potentially give you hand advantage? There's just a lot of questions you have to ask about what your opponent wants to do and how you can stop them from doing that. So just think about all the ways you can mess with them, and if your cards in hand will actually let you do that. And the last question is, do I have any card draw in my hand to help me smooth out bad draws or dig to find specific cards? I'm going to talk about card draw a lot in the upcoming strategy guides I have planned, but for now, just know that card draw can be a great tool for decks to have. If your opening hand is keepable but maybe a little iffy, having some sort of draw in hand as well can help you dive into your deck faster and potentially find better options. Keeping card draw in your opening hand can also help you start the game with hand advantage over your opponent, which is a great thing to have against characters without card draw, like Sherlock Yananga or Sun Wukong, and generally aggressive characters love having more cards available than their opponent. And one more thing, if they ever add tutor cards into the game, like Lady of the Lake or Timeout, those will also be good to keep in an opening hand, as they will let you draw whatever good card they find in your deck for you straight away. The problem with Lady of the Lake, of course, is that Arthur really needs to use that after Excalibur, because he needs every advantage he can get, including using a 6 value attack twice. So that's just something to think about if in case they ever add more tutor cards into the game. So those were all the points I wanted to make about the different things you should think about in your mind when deciding whether or not to mulligan, and I'll summarize them here for you again right now. The first thing is, do you have any super duper uber important 1-copy cards that your deck relies on to win? Do you have any sidekick cards in your hand? Are you going first? Are there any cheese tactics, or are you going to attack turn 1? If you're going second, do you have any block cards in your hand? And then if you do, which block cards do you have? And are you comfortable playing them if you get attacked turn 1? Do you have the cards that will progress your game plan? And do you have cards that will slow down your opponent's game plan at the same time? And lastly, do you have any card draw to help you dig through your deck faster for more options and potentially gain hand advantage over your opponent? All right, so I just told you every strategical aspect about mulliganing that I could think of. It's now time to put this to the test and actually go through some examples. So now let's head over to whatever platform I'm currently using this week, and let's check it out. Big thank you to everyone who commented on my last post, as I will be randomly selecting some of the comments that you gave me to do practice mulligans for. Let's go. All right, so this might be the first time some of you have seen my face, which I guess is exciting, but here we are in Vorpal, and basically what I'm going to do is I have a list of the matchups that people commented on my last post. So I'm going to spin a wheel, and just whoever it lands on, I'll look at their comment, and then I'll load the stuff into Vorpal board, and we'll just see how it plays out. So yeah, this will be kind of exciting. Here we go. Let's spin first. Spin. Nice. All right, so we got Dr. Mr. Plant, Bloody Mary versus Achilles from Mary's perspective on Raptor map. Oh boy. All right. Let's get all this stuff loaded into Vorpal. There'll probably be a cut here, so when I finish snapping, everything will be loaded. Okay, so we're back. I accidentally deleted Mary's health dial, but that's okay. I'm just going to put Mary first, just because the comment didn't specify it, but let's talk about Achilles first for a second. I'm pretty sure the Achilles player wants to kill Pat as soon as possible, because Mary doesn't necessarily have the best defenses to deal with mad Achilles, because things like mirror image that will not block the 2 damage or the extra 2 value that will get added onto Achilles attacks, and just like you don't really have the best value blocks to deal with that as Mary. So let's shuffle this deck and then draw 5 cards. Let's see what her opening hand looks like. All right. Got evade, broken glass, jump scare. Okay, so Mary doesn't necessarily have any super duper important cards. I guess you'd probably want to see Ghostly Touch at some point during the game, especially in this matchup for the heal. You don't have a sidekick, obviously, so all the cards are just Bloody Mary. You probably want to try to not kill Pat right away in this matchup because, like I said, you don't have the facilities to deal with the damage you'll take. So you probably want to try to kill Achilles like before Pat, which obviously hard with the 18 health, and things like Helm are obviously going to screw you up a lot. You do have card draw in your opening hand with 2 evades and a broken glass. Not necessarily sure how helpful that's going to be because you, as Bloody Mary, you need to get a bunch of third actions against Achilles because he can have up to 5 feints, which is just a recipe for disaster for you. You probably aren't going to see a lot of third action effects actually get triggered because of that. So looking at this hand, we have 2 aggressive cards in Jump Scare and Bloody Requiem that would be pretty good attacks. We could trigger Jump Scare right away. This is a really good starting zone for that. Broken Glass would work as an attack in this deck because a lot of Achilles cards, or his block cards, are 3 or 4, or 2, I guess. Helm is a 2. Battle Hardened is a 2, but Feint is also a 2. And it's a little risky using this as an attack because, like I said, Achilles just has a bunch of feints. So in this matchup, it's probably a good block card and probably a block card you want to use before Pat dies because when Achilles is throwing out 5s and 6s, Broken Glass really isn't going to do the trick. So I guess I like these options. I don't think having the evades early necessarily helps you that much, especially because Achilles doesn't really have card draw until Pat dies, so you don't really need these evades early in the game. And especially with so much card draw in your hand, it helps if it's more like spread out. If you have 3 actions and have like 1 card draw, or have 3 cards in your hand and have 1 card draw card, so that you play it if you get attacked, and then later on you just draw another one. I think it'd be better to spread it out instead of having literally half of them in your opening hand like this. This is also an interesting map. I think it actually works in Mary's favor a lot for activating Jump Scare. It's also fairly tight and condensed. You can get to the other side of the board 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, you can get basically anywhere in 6 spaces, which is a double maneuver from Mary. So if you started your turn with a natural 3 actions, you could reach anyone, maybe. I'm sure there's some like body blocking Achilles can do with Pat. But it also works in Achilles' favor because remember, Helm has a boost value of 4, so he can actually move 6 spaces too. So positioning around Spear Throw might be a little bit difficult. But I think you could keep this hand, but I think I would mulligan this one if I had it in a tournament setting or something like that. So let's return it to the deck, reshuffle, and see if that risk paid off. Jump Scare again. Stolen Memories could be really good if he has a Helm early in his hand. That would also stop him from switching Pat and Achilles if you attacked, which is another one. Okay, so I really like this hand because I think Stolen Memories, having both of them available to you early in the game, would actually be really good. And it helps get your hand count down so that on your turn you can play it and you're not drawing a card. So your hand side, like if we played this turn 1, we'd go down to 4 cards. And depending on what we saw in Achilles' opening hand, we could actually play it again and then have 3 cards on his turn. Although we wouldn't have any card draw in hand, so it's not like the best thing, but I think this is actually a really good card against Achilles because you can make him get rid of Helms. Double attacks are also 3 damage, and those are really annoying against Mary, especially when you're playing with a low hand count and don't necessarily want to feint like an incoming big attack or something like that. So we did not get punished. Nice. All right, let's spin the wheel and see what we get next. All right, we got Hat Chowder. Achilles, another Achilles. Achilles versus Invisible Man on Sherwood Forest, Achilles' point of view. So this is actually a funny matchup because Zero just did a stream where he grinded a bunch of Achilles IM matchups. And it's actually, like, it sounds horrible for Invisible Man on paper because Achilles just has so much health. But he can actually fatigue Achilles pretty well. So let's just get this set up. I'm going to snap again and it'll be all done. All set up when I'm done. Okay, it's all set up. I will say I am by no means an expert Invisible Man player, so this might be a matchup I get totally wrong, but I think as Achilles, you need to keep Pat alive, so I actually think you want to not use his cards right away and kill him, because then you'll start drawing too many cards, and especially on a map like this map doesn't look too big, but you will be boosting a lot to reach Invisible Man, depending a lot on his fog tokens, of course. So let's shuffle, see what we get, and see if we want to use it. Okay, so something really interesting about Invisible Man is that he doesn't have any feints. And that means that your battle hardens will always trigger because they just can't be canceled. And Invisible Man doesn't have any hand disruption, which means that we have both battle hardens in our hand and a spear throw, which is just part of our win condition. So I actually think this might be a keep hand because you could literally just keep attacking Invisible Man with battle hardens, and he can't like stop you from just looping it infinitely. You probably want to do that with Achilles and not Pat, because Invisible Man has some 5s, Emerge from Mist and Surprise Attack, the 5-value cancel. So the block cards available in hand, I guess Battle Hardened is a block card, but Pat might go down in like 2 or 3 hits here. So probably either boost in with Achilles right away, probably using whatever you draw. You could also just maneuver to this space and spear throw him, because you definitely want to spear throw 4 times with both battle hardens in this matchup to just further reduce his health without drawing cards, especially when Pat is dead. But given just having both battle hardens available right away means that you could start cycling, and he's forced into a tricky position because he either blocks, and it's just a battle hardened, so that block card must have some effect that he like can actually make use of, or he just takes the attack and it's 2 damage, but you're just constantly going to throw those attacks at him, so he's going to run out of blocks eventually because he only has 15 block cards in his deck. And he'll probably use the trash ones like Covert Preparation or Lurking, the ones that are printed value 2s but could be 3s. But he has a lot of good block cards that he'd probably want to save for when you're going to deal him more damage. So I actually think this is like a really strong opening. And seeing a spear throw early also helps, because that way you can guarantee that you'll play it before Pat dies and you discard 2 cards randomly, which would probably break the cycle, but you could get so much pressure early game, I think, out of these. It is also nice to have a helm in your opening hand, not because of the effect, but because of that big ol' 4 in the boost section that you can use to boost with. Especially, like I said before, it's a pretty insidiously long map. You don't realize like how far or how big some of these loops are, but like I said, Zero streamed this matchup a ton, and on this map especially, it was hard for Achilles to keep up with IM. So I actually think this is a certified keep, just because of this nonsense you can do with Battle Hardened and abusing Invisible Man's lack of cancels. Whew. Okay, let's spin the wheel again. Mustafazade. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Okay. I think that's this one. Okay, Yananga versus Medusa on Sarpedon. Yananga goes first. Yananga's perspective. I would like to know whether she has a chance against one of the big 3 members on Medusa's own arena. Kind of. Yeah, I get the kind of. All right, let's set everything up. I'll be right back. Okay, so I didn't snap that time. Sorry, but let's talk about the map real quick, because this is actually a very important thing to talk about, especially for Medusa. So Sarpedon appears to be a good Medusa map because you can just sit in this tri-zone space, and now suddenly this whole section of the board is just zoned off because of your ability. But because of the hard cutoffs that the red, green, and blue zones have on the side of the board, it can actually be kind of easy for your opponent to stay out of your ability range. Which is good for Yananga, but it's also not good because Yananga is an interesting hero because of her ability. She wants to keep her archers, her sidekicks, with her. So let's just say Medusa's starting second. If you move into that space, let's say, to attack her, or actually she'd be there, to attack her turn 1. Unless you're using a card with a move effect after it, like Skirmish or Stallion Charge, you're going to be vulnerable to return fire after this. And if you have Yananga alone like that, she's vulnerable to take damage because she can't offset it to her archers. But if you bring your archers with you, Medusa could then attack them. And you don't want your archers to get attacked, you want Yananga to get attacked so that you can split the damage with your archers and then play 1 with the land for 3 health, which will just give you a lot of value. Medusa can also ping the archers, which isn't that big of a deal when they have 2 health, but it puts you in a tricky scenario where you're not entirely sure what your positioning should be like. So this map has advantages and disadvantages for this interaction of fighters, which I think is actually really interesting, and that's going to be important when we look at Yananga's cards. Double attack, Stallion Charge, Dividing Con. Okay, so Stallion Charge. Move Yananga up to 5 spaces. You may move through opposing fighters, then deal 1 damage to each opposing fighter she was moved through. So Medusa has 3 1 health sidekicks. What is a really good way to deal with 1 health sidekicks? Stallion Charge. So based on the fact that you drew 2 of them, just no matter what else is in your hand, this is an insta-keep for Yananga because this matchup is relatively even, but I think it helps Yananga a lot if she can kill the Harpies early so that she doesn't have to deal with the additional 3 discards Medusa has in Clutch and Claws. Because Yananga doesn't have any card draw, so the discards are going to hurt her even more. Stallion Charge is a really good way to get rid of those Harpies, and once you kill them all, yes, there are 2 winged frenzies that Medusa will have, but it makes it a lot harder for Medusa to line up the Clutch and Claws with the Harpy revives if they're all gone. So seeing 2 Stallion Charges is really, really good. Rain of Arrows, it's alright against Medusa just because she has a lot of 3 value cards to block with, like Dash and Snipe. So it's not necessarily going to be super impactful, I think, as it is versus other heroes, but it will help you get card advantage by making her spend 2 cards on your 1 card. And the fact that it's also paired with Master of the Hunt means if you just draw a couple more, maybe another double attack or your Archer Revive and another good offensive option, you can start crafting a combo turn early, which will be good if you can whittle down her Harpies and then combo Medusa when she's exposed. Seeing Divide and Conquer here, this is probably the worst card in your deck just because it doesn't really do that much. The archers aren't really utilized for their capacities as fighters. They're utilized because they take damage for Yananga. If there were no archer-specific cards in this deck, that would actually be okay. That would probably be beneficial even, just because you don't really need them to do that much. Maybe throw out the occasional momentous shift, which is just always nice from a range character. But so yeah, in summary, we have 2 ways to deal with harpies insanely easily early in the game. I don't know what Medusa's positioning would be here, but like if she clumped them all up like this, yeah, you can bet your bottom dollar you should move in and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But obviously, like the Medusa might do, I don't know, something like that, so that you can't like ping them all in one shot. You gotta count the spaces against Yananga. Stallion charge is so good. So we have 2 Stallion charges. We have the start of a big combo turn, and we have a throwaway card. But the Stallion charges are the real big ticket items here. So that was kind of another obvious one, but that is a keep. All right, let's do the next matchup. Marlon Williams. Alice versus Achilles. Oh, what is with all these Achilles? The Hanging Gardens map. Achilles goes first. Alice's perspective. Well, all right. Let's get that out. All right. So this is a really interesting matchup because they both have the Alice big value in their abilities, because at some points during the game, not the whole game, but at some points, both of these characters will have attacks that have an additional 2 damage attached to them. So it's going to be a battle of who can hit hardest first. Achilles starting first on this map is always tricky because the second player has the low ground. So usually Pat will boost in an attack. And as Alice, you could do 2 things. You could place your sidekick there to stop it, but then Pat doesn't even need to boost. You could put him there to maybe dissuade him from coming in, because then he's like surrounded by all your guys. You could use some Jabberwock cards on him. But then you have to decide whether or not you actually want to kill Pat in this matchup, which is always fun to think about for the non-Achilles player. Or you could tuck the Jabberwock over here. Fortunately, you get to choose where your sidekick goes and your size after you draw your cards as Alice. So we're going to draw first, and then based on whether or not we mulligan, that will help us figure that out. Okay, so this is a very interesting hand. I could have sworn I shuffled, but both Looking Glasses early, which is, I guess, nice. It's the best card in our deck because it'll heal us. So we'll be at 19 health for sure this game, unless Achilles throws out an offensive feint, which probably doesn't want to do since Alice has Snicker Snack and Make Some Foe and shifts that will all be a lot of damage if not canceled. We have, and of course Looking Glass has a ton of card draw, and it has the teleport, which could be very impactful on this map. But again, we probably don't want to play this too early because we need the healing and our health is still full at the start of the game. We also have Mad as a Hatter, which I guess is a good mobility card this early in the game. And we have Drink Me. So we have a lot of card draw. This is one of those scenarios where it's an iffy hand, but we have enough card draw to like find better options. So what we could always do here is start small as Alice, expecting the Pat attack. Probably throw out Mad as a Hatter on defense. Hope it's the Day of Your Doom card, which would be a 5 to a 6, so we'd take 2 damage, and not the Battle Frenzy, which I guess we would also take 2 damage, so I guess we're just expecting to take 2 damage here. It could be the double attack, which would probably not be the best thing in the world, because we'd probably have to blow both of these, and this actually would change our size, so we would be big, but so we'd take 1 damage from the second attack, which would be a 4 with the high ground. We don't have any Jabberwock cards, so we do not want him getting attacked. So we could put him there, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces away. So that's a boost with a double attack. Or we could put him there, which is a boost with Helm, 6 spaces, but it would get the high ground. Or we could put him there, which is again, another boost. But this doesn't have any sort of high ground bonus on it. So it's tough to say. I think this is one of those hands that we're actually going to mulligan away, just because we want Alice's more impactful cards. These cards are very passive. You're doing a lot of reacting, especially with Looking Glass, and this isn't really... If you're only going to have so many attack actions in this game, you usually don't want Mad as a Hatter to be one. Because yes, it is a 5. That's still not nothing. Achilles usually can only block a maximum of 4. But you want these on defense to be 4s when you're small. Because you have a lot of 2-value defense cards. So you kind of need to block big when you can. So we're going to mulligan here and try to find more aggressive options. Try to find our Jabber Walk cards. I almost said Jackalope because I always just confuse them because they sound the same vocally. Maybe find a Snicker Snack or one of our 1-copy attacks that are decently good. Other Side of the Mushroom would be great for kiting. So let's return these to the deck. Shuffle. And drawing Looking Glass there is one of those times where, yes, it's awesome that you got your best card, but you don't necessarily need it turn 1. Yeah, it's tough, especially seeing both of them. All right, here we go. I'm Late, another Drink Me, Eat Me, Momentous Shift, and Skirmish. So I guess this isn't necessarily a good hand either. It's good that we got Ennies so that if the Jabberwock is attacked, regardless where he is, he can actually block. And since we have options for him, we're going to go put him there. We're going to play around the wily fighting that would happen if we went there. Eat Me and Drink Me, flexible, especially moving 3 spaces. You might be able to catch someone off guard into a high ground spot on this map, although usually you don't leave yourself vulnerable to being attacked if you're on the low ground, just because it's like, oh yeah, Alice is 3 spaces away, but like it's usually a pretty obvious boost. So maybe not like the most surprising thing, but I guess it's good to have both of these for flexible on-demand size changes, because they're the only schemes, or they are 2 schemes that let you change size. Every other size change effect is on like a card that could get canceled. I'm Late. You're probably going to use this on defense when you're small. Like if Pat attacked us here, we'd probably use I'm Late, go 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There aren't really that many like good places to move, but I guess we could go like there. And depending on where Achilles goes, we would start our turn big, and then could maybe maneuver in an attack with a shift or something like that. So this actually like is a pretty good play, especially because, well, I guess you would take 3 damage from both of the Pat attacks, which isn't the best. So maybe you'd use Skirmish, but you only have 2 skirmishes. You're probably going to want to save those for when Achilles can throw out 6s at you. So, and Shift really isn't that much better, although it could be a 4 if you're small. So again, not the best starting hand, but the other one was very, like I said, reactive, very passive. And in this match, it's a battle of who can deal more damage first. So I think Alice needs to mount some sort of counter aggression against Achilles, and pressure him back at least. So this is one of those times where like you're a little unsatisfied and you mulligan, and you're still unsatisfied, and I guess there's nothing you can do. I've been talking for around like 30 and change minutes, so we're going to do one more and then wrap up this video. So thank you all for bearing with me. I hope you're finding this interesting. This is a really fun exercise for me to do, especially because you guys gave me the examples to do. All right, last spin. Here we go. Donor King. All right, you are our lucky winner. You are the last one for today. Sorry, everyone that didn't get picked. You'll get picked eventually, maybe. Donor King. Little Red versus Bruce. Bruce goes first in the Beowulf cabin map, Red's perspective. All right, so that's hero route. All right, we'll be set up when I clap my hands. Okay, last one. So we have Little Red versus Bruce. Bruce is going first on hero route. Ooh, okay, so I personally haven't done this matchup, but it's two of my 3 favorite characters. The Raptors weren't invited, unfortunately, but they would have loved to be invited to this party because this is their favorite map. This is a little rough for Little Red just on the get-go because Bruce Lee is a move 3 character. Little Red is a move 2, and when there's a movement that was weird. When there's a movement disparity between heroes, the one with the higher movement has an advantage on this map because the closing and opening doors, or I should say only opening, sorry, because closing is free. Opening doors is a little less cumbersome for them because they can still move 2 spaces as part of that maneuver, whereas 2 movement fighters can only move 1 after opening a door. So Bruce Lee is going to have speed on us. Also, the Huntsman, he's probably going to die early because if there are knives in the basket, he can block with Once Upon a Time or Stones in the Belly. If there's a pelt in the basket, he can block with the Wolf Skin. And trigger effects, you can obviously play them as blank 2s. But when there's a flower in the basket, you're just playing a blank 2, and it's probably going to be a little tricky to line up the symbols when Bruce Lee is going to attack you 2 to 5 times a turn. So I'm expecting the Huntsman to die early, and I'm putting him right next to me because I want Bruce to have to maneuver on over to attack him, or boost on over, to attack him turn 1, whereas he is 1, 2, 3 spaces away from us at the start of the game, so he could attack Red without boosting, and I only have 2 cancels and no movement effects on my defense cards, so I'm expecting a little bit of a rough matchup if he gets his Jeets early. So let's see what we draw and see if it helps us defensively. Wolf Skin, what big eyes you have, never leave the path. What's that in my basket and Once Upon a Time? Okay, so first thing I noticed is the key cards in this matchup for Red are what big eyes you have because it's your only cancel. It's a 3 value cancel, so it'll actually block all the damage of a Jeet. And it's really good. You only have 2 copies of it, so it's good to see one come up this early because even if you're playing this off symbol and you don't get the flower ignore value part of the card, with the cancel, Bruce Lee could only hit a 4 if he attacks with a skirmish or a nunchaku on a Jeet. So you really don't need the flowers necessarily. So having one of your feints or cancels in your opening hand is really nice to see. The Wolf Skin, and I guess never leave the path, are card draw. So this is good because it's an any, so the Huntsman can play it. And it'll draw you 2 cards, which could be used to play other... or used to get other block options. And it's especially good because it has a knife symbol on it. So let's just say Bruce Lee comes in and attacks the Huntsman turn 1. We can play this, take some damage. He'll probably gain an action or something like that. It might be a shift, which would be really unfortunate, but we would draw 2 cards and then have knives set up so that we could play a Once Upon a Time immediately after. And then if Bruce commits to coming to this side of the map, we can just maneuver the Huntsman out and just stay right there. And now he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 spaces away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 spaces away. Although I guess he could move there and play Bring It On. So you're never truly safe from Bruce Lee, but I guess go there, but then you'd have to boost. Or I guess you're double maneuvering against Bruce, so you could just do that. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're still 7 spaces away, which is a boost with a water. So there are things you can do. So I like this combination in my opening hand. And drawing 2 cards is good against Bruce Lee because he has a ton of card draw, and he'll probably have hand advantage over you for a lot of the match. So getting this means you won't go into a pit early, especially if he decides to attack you over and over again. Never leave the path. It's not super impactful in this matchup because the damage is only 2 damage and you're dealing that just to one person. But when you think about the math, 2 of these is 4 damage. 2 of these is 6 damage if these aren't canceled. So that's 10 damage right away. If you recycle this with hands, that's 13 damage. And you just need 1 more point of damage somewhere. And Bruce Lee is dead. So you actually have like a calculatable lethal with just your auto damage from your deck. So having this early, and I guess this early if you're using it for the damage. You could also use it as a teleport, I guess, if you wanted to get away from him, or if he was running away, you could go towards him. You could even use it as draw if you needed to. Like I said, Bruce Lee draws a ton of cards, so if you were really behind, if he had like 7 cards and you had 2 cards in your hand, I could maybe see myself playing this, but the just auto damage is nice. And you have a basket, which is just always a great card. It helps like even out the inconsistency you have between playing your symbols. So for that reason, I think this hand is a pretty obvious keep, because if Bruce Lee comes and attacks us, we have a game plan. We can play Wolf Skin, and if he's going to attack us again, we'll play this. And it's good to have Huntsman black cards early, or at least like getting value out of the symbols lining up instead of just playing it as a blank 2. So I think we're looking pretty good with this hand in what I think is a slightly uphill matchup for red against Bruce, because like I said, the cancels, and it's kind of hard to keep Huntsman alive, but we drew a pretty good combination of cards to utilize. Just for funsies, let's see what 2 cards we would have drawn from the Wolf Skin. All right, the healing and another path. So I guess that means Little Red's going to go in, be aggressive, and we can actually get a heal card off from the Huntsman, which is nice to have early. So we're kind of cheating there. But yeah. Okay, this was a really fun exercise. I hope you all enjoyed this. I love using Vorpal Board. I'll say it now. I'll start the argument in the comments. Vorpal Board is better than TTS. You heard it here. You heard it here first, folks. So yeah, I hope you have a great day. The rest of the video should be really short. So all right, I'll see you guys all later. Bye. All right, well, that was absolutely exhilarating. Let's wrap up this video with my final thoughts. While mulligans are not an official part of the game, they provide something that every card game should have, a way to mitigate bad luck at the beginning of the match to ensure that neither player gets completely screwed over by elements totally out of their control. It's a simple rule, doesn't add too much time to the game, and makes gameplay feel better, so I fully endorse this rule as a standard of competitive play moving forward, and I personally incorporate this form of mulliganing into all of my casual games as well, and I think you should too. So that's all I have for you guys today. Hopefully you liked the live examples. That was a very fun thing to do. As a reminder, you should check out Unmatched League and join the respective Discord. It's a super cool new site built by Frank K. He's put a ton of work into it to make it as amazing as possible, and it's especially cool if you are into competitive play. I'm not sure what my video schedule looks like going forward with the upcoming Winter of Champions tournament starting next week, but I will try to post some regular content in addition to the gameplay/commentary videos I will be uploading weekly as I progress through my matches. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and as always, like, subscribe, and yeet!